Millions of people are living in peril. No shelter, no security, no food. Drought, famine and poverty afflict the lives of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Natural disasters and man-made conflicts have trapped millions into spiraling cycles of poverty, malnutrition and disease. This Ramadan, you can change this. Your zakat can feed the starving and help build homes. Your zakat can help educate children and provide medicines to the sick. Your zakat can change their world. Donate to Islamic Relief. Call 0800 111 898 or visit islamicrelief.org.za. Millions of people are living in peril. No shelter, no security, no food. Drought, famine and poverty afflict the lives of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Natural disasters and man-made conflicts have trapped millions into spiraling cycles of poverty, malnutrition and disease. This Ramadan, you can change this. Your zakat can feed the starving and help build homes. Your zakat can help educate children and provide medicines to the sick. Your zakat can change their world. Donate to Islamic Relief. Call 0800 111 898 or visit islamicrelief.org.za. Millions of people are living in peril. No shelter, no security, no food. Drought, famine and poverty afflict the lives of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Natural disasters and man-made conflicts have trapped millions into spiraling cycles of poverty, malnutrition and disease. This Ramadan, you can change this. Your zakat can feed the starving and help build homes. Your zakat can help educate children and provide medicines to the sick. Your zakat can change their world. Donate to Islamic Relief. Call 0800 111 898 or visit islamicrelief.org.za. Millions of people are living in peril. No shelter, no security, no food. Drought, famine and poverty afflict the lives of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Natural disasters and man-made conflicts have trapped millions into spiraling cycles of poverty, malnutrition and disease. This Ramadan, you can change this. Your zakat can feed the starving and help build homes. Your zakat can help educate children and provide medicines to the sick. Your zakat can change their world. Donate to Islamic Relief. Call 0800 111 898 or visit islamicrelief.org.za. Millions of people are living in peril. No shelter, no security, no food. Drought, famine and poverty afflict the lives of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Natural disasters and man-made conflicts have trapped millions into spiraling cycles of poverty, malnutrition and disease. This Ramadan, you can change this. Your zakat can feed the starving and help build homes. Your zakat can help educate children and provide medicines to the sick. Your zakat can change their world. Donate to Islamic Relief. Call 0800 111 898 or visit islamicrelief.org.za. Millions of people are living in peril. No shelter, no security, no food. Drought, famine and poverty afflict the lives of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Natural disasters and man-made conflicts have trapped millions into spiraling cycles of poverty, malnutrition and disease. This Ramadan, you can change this. Your zakat can feed the starving and help build homes. Your zakat can help educate children and provide medicines to the sick. Your zakat can change their world. Donate to Islamic Relief. Call 0800 111 898 or visit islamicrelief.org.za. Millions of people are living in peril. No shelter, no security, no food. Drought, famine, and poverty afflict the lives of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Natural disasters and man-made conflicts have trapped millions into spiraling cycles of poverty, malnutrition, and disease. This Ramadan, you can change this. Your zakat can feed the starving and help build homes. Your zakat can help educate children and provide medicines to the sick. Your zakat can change their world. Donate to Islamic Relief. Call 0800 111 898 or visit islamicrelief.org.za. Millions of people are living in peril. No shelter, no security, no food. Drought, famine, and poverty afflict the lives of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Natural disasters and man-made conflicts have trapped millions into spiraling cycles of poverty, malnutrition, and disease. This Ramadan, you can change this. Your zakat can feed the starving and help build homes. Your zakat can help educate children and provide medicines to the sick. Your zakat can change their world. Donate to Islamic Relief. Call 0800 111 898 or visit islamicrelief.org.za. Millions of people are living in peril. No shelter, no security, no food. Drought, famine, and poverty afflict the lives of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Natural disasters and man-made conflicts have trapped millions into spiraling cycles of poverty, malnutrition, and disease. This Ramadan, you can change this. Your zakat can feed the starving and help build homes. Your zakat can help educate children and provide medicines to the sick. Your zakat can change their world. Donate to Islamic Relief. Call 0800 111 898 or visit islamicrelief.org.za.
For the love of Allah, we are responding to disasters wherever they strike. For the love of Allah, we are rebuilding lives with projects that last. For the love of Allah, we are enabling communities to become resilient to future disasters. Since we began together, we have transformed and saved 117 million lives. All for the love of Allah. For the love of Allah, we are responding to disasters wherever they strike. For the love of Allah, we are rebuilding lives with projects that last. For the love of Allah, we are enabling communities to become resilient to future disasters. Since we began together, we have transformed and saved 117 million lives. All for the love of Allah. For the love of Allah, we are responding to disasters wherever they strike. For the love of Allah, we are rebuilding lives with projects that last. For the love of Allah, we are enabling communities to become resilient to future disasters. Since we began together, we have transformed and saved 117 million lives. All for the love of Allah. For the love.
Millions of people are living in peril. No shelter, no security, no food. Drought, famine, and poverty afflict the lives of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Natural disasters and man-made conflicts have trapped millions into spiraling cycles of poverty, malnutrition, and disease. This Ramadan, you can change this. Your zakat can feed the starving and help build homes. Your zakat can help educate children and provide medicines to the sick. Your zakat can change their world. Donate to Islamic Relief. Call 0800 111 898 or visit islamicrelief.org.za. Millions of people are living in peril. No shelter, no security, no food. Drought, famine, and poverty afflict the lives of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Natural disasters and man-made conflicts have trapped millions into spiraling cycles of poverty, malnutrition, and disease. This Ramadan, you can change this. Your zakat can feed the starving and help build homes. Your zakat can help educate children and provide medicines to the sick. Your zakat can change their world. Donate to Islamic Relief. Call 0800 111 898 or visit islamicrelief.org.za.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا اللهم زدنا علما وارزقنا فهما يا مولانا يا رب العالمين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته and welcome to everyone who's tuning to this podcast, this vlog, this YouTube broadcast this evening. And we are looking at a very interesting topic, which is called zakat. And it's a topic that needs much discussion. But on behalf of Islamic Relief South Africa, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you here this evening. We have some great guests on our panel this evening. You are welcome to ask your questions. And at the end of the broadcast, we will furnish those questions to the necessary guests and they will answer them, inshallah ta'ala, based on the question that's been asked. So you can let your questions start coming in, you can ask them, and as I said, towards the end, we will start with that. So it is a great pleasure to be here this evening. And without much further ado, as we start many of our programs, we started with the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, none other than our Hafid Muhammad Faqih. He's going to be reciting to us this evening. He's one of our volunteers in Johannesburg. So Bismillah, Hafid, and we'll hear from you, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون أياما معدودات فمن كان منكم مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر وعلى الذين يطيقونه فدية طعام مسكين فمن تطوع خيرا فهو خير له وأن تصوموا خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصمه ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Verily, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has spoken the truth. To our Hafid Muhammad Faqih, Jazakallah khairan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you with a long, healthy life, inshallah, that you can mesmerize us with this beautiful voice and the recitation of the Quran. Jazakallah khairan so much. It's always a pleasure to listen to you, and we wish you well, inshallah ta'ala. As you heard from the ayahs that has been recited, now it is that we are heading towards a very auspicious month, the month of Ramadan. A month that is so blessed that there is one night that is better than 1,000 months during this period, which is the month of Ramadan. And also it is a time when people start giving more, we are more charitable. We do so many things to gain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let us seize this beautiful month of Ramadan that we can actually fulfill our obligations not only upon our belief structures, but also upon those most vulnerable communities, inshallah ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about zakah, and zakah is mentioned 82 times in the Quran, mashallah, and tells you it's also the third pillar of Islam, just after salah. So it tells us the importance of zakah. And this evening it is, our pleasure to have with us Maulana Ibrahim Bam. He is the Secretary General of Jamiat al-Ulama in Gauteng and South Africa, mashallah. So we are very pleased and blessed to have him take time out of his very busy schedule to talk to us a little bit about zakah and the importance thereof. So please pull up closer, turn up the volume, and listen attentively. As I said, if you have any questions, please forward those questions to ourselves, and you can put it onto the chat, and we'll ask those questions at the end of our broadcast this evening. But no, without much further ado, I hand you over to Maulana Ibrahim Bam. Bismillah.
Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة صدق الله العظيم. Respected viewers and listeners, we begin by praising Almighty Allah that Allah has granted us a deen that is comprehensive, a deen which Allah Ta'ala in the Quran says, وَرَضِيتُ لَكُمُ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا, I am pleased with Islam as your religion. It is a deen and a religion which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen for us. We send salutations upon our beloved Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, through whom we have received Allah Ta'ala's message and the best of Allah Ta'ala's creation. We have obviously a very important topic, the importance of zakat, and Qarisab read verses pertaining to Ramadan. Shahru Ramadan alladhi unzila fihi al-Quran. It is a month of Ramadan in which the Quran was revealed. And throughout the world, I think there is a tendency to fulfill the obligation of zakat close or in Ramadan. Now, technically, from the juristic point of view, it is not necessary to give our zakat in Ramadan. Technically, whenever zakat becomes compulsory upon us, we have to fulfill it at that time. And we all know, and of course, there are two aspects of today's program. One is a motivation on the importance, and one is some details with regard to how to calculate our zakat. So in the second portion, Mufti Hafiji, my esteemed colleague, will be shedding light on that. But what we are saying is that when zakat becomes compulsory, 1 year after the minimum amount which makes zakat compulsory becomes due upon you, you have to fulfill your zakat, whether it be Muharram, Rabiul Awwal, or Rabiul Thani. But there is added benefit in giving our zakat in Ramadan because of Ramadan being a blessed month, and there are narrations of our beloved Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in which Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has given the indication that any farz deed done in Ramadan, the rewards and the blessedness of it is multiplied and increased. So after that small introduction, we look at what we have got in our slides, if it's possible to display that. If not, we will continue with it. The first slide is, of course, the importance of zakah. And the ayat which is in the slide, Aqimus Salah wa Atu Zakah, establish Salat and give Zakat. In this, there is a reference with regard to the ayat number, but Zakat has been highlighted at least 82 times in the Holy Quran, many a times with Zakat. Aqimus Salat wa Atu Zakah is constantly mentioned in the Holy Quran. And of course, we know that Zakat is one of the pillars of Islam. Buni al-Islamu ala khams. And on the screen you have the entire hadith which is in Sahihain, Bukhari and Muslim. Buni al-Islamu ala khams, that Islam is built upon 5 pillars, testifying that there is no one worthy of worship besides Allah. Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, our beloved Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, is a messenger of Allah, establishing the salat, paying the zakat, obligatory charity, making the hajj to the house of Almighty Allah, and fasting in Ramadan. And that, of course, concludes the importance and the basis of the importance of zakat in our first slide, and we go to the next one, which speaks about the benefits of zakat. Now, this zakat equals to purification. And this is a very interesting aspect. The literal meaning of zakat is purification. And there is also a verse in the 11th juz of the Holy Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا وَصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ. O Prophet of Almighty Allah, take from the believers, from their wealth, sadaqah, charity, تُطَهِّرُهُمْ, to purify them. So Allah Ta'ala speaks about when we give zakat, it purifies us. And what is interesting is that nowhere in the Quran does it say it purifies the one who is receiving the zakat. The one who is giving, it is a purification for him. This goes a very long way in telling us about the priority of Islam, in that when you give zakat, you are benefiting. More than the one who is receiving it, you are the one who are benefiting. It's a purification for you. And therefore in the Holy Quran, Allah Ta'ala says, وَفِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ مَعْلُومٌ. In Surah Ma'arij, Allah Ta'ala says, in your wealth, there is a specific portion Allah has determined. لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ, for those who are needy, who come and ask of you, and those who are deprived. So in your wealth, there is a portion for those people. And if you do not give that wealth, you are not fulfilling what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for you to give from the wealth that Allah has granted you. And it's not amazing that whenever Allah ta'ala calls upon us to give charity, Allah motivates us. وَآتُوهُم مِّن مَّالِ اللَّهِ الَّذِي آتَاكُمْ. Give from the wealth I gave you. And anyone who reads the Quran on a regular basis will come across this verse repeatedly. وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. From what I have sustained and given you, spend from that. What a remarkable motivation. Allah is telling you, you don't own the wealth. I have given you the wealth. As the owner of the wealth, who have made you a trustee of the wealth, I'm asking you to give from the wealth I have given you. And yet you are miserly in giving from the wealth I have given you, and I'm asking you to give. Subhanallah. So the aspect of purification. Why is zakat known as something that purifies? Ulama have given many reasons. However, just in the slide I've referred to two. One is that wealth has both positive and negative aspects. Allah Ta'ala in the Quran says in Surah Nisa, وَأَمْوَالَكُمُ الَّتِي جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ قِيَامًا. Allah has made the wealth the basis of our existence. We need wealth to sustain our needs. Allah Ta'ala says, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً. Oh Allah, give us good in this world. But yet there are other aspects with regard to that wealth becomes the means of many, many trials, fitna and evil. Therefore Allah in Surah Taghabun says, إِنَّمَا أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ فِتْنَةً. Your wealth and your children are a trial, they are fitna. And then in a hadith in Tirmidhi, which I have put on the screen, 2 hungry wolves, if left loose amongst a flock of sheep, cause less harm to them than to a person's religions. So 2 hungry wolves let loose on a flock of sheep causes less harm to that sheep than what love for wealth and love for prestige does to a person's deen. And therefore Nabi Karim Sallallahu said, if a person pays zakat on his wealth, it causes the evil of that wealth to diminish. So the negative aspects of the wealth, which are many, لا تلهكم أموالكم ولا أولادكم عن ذكر الله. Don't allow your wealth to divert you from remembering Allah. So by giving zakat, it purifies us from the harmful effects of wealth. That's one of the meanings of purification. The second understanding of purification is also very interesting. In the Holy Quran, in the 10th juz of the Holy Quran, in Surah Tawbah, Surah Bara'ah, Allah Ta'ala says, those who accumulate wealth, and فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ عَلِيمٍ. Those who accumulate their wealth, give them tidings of a punishment that will come of them. يَوْمَ يُحْمَى عَلَيْهَا فِي نَارِ جَهَنَّمْ. Their wealth will be put in the fire of Jahannam. فَتُقْوَى بِهَا جِبَاهُهُمْ. And it will be heated, and it will brand portions of their body. Now, what is the accumulation of wealth? What is the hoarding of wealth? وَالَّذِينَ يَكْنِزُونَ الذَّهَبَ وَالْفِضَّةَ وَلَا يُنْفِقُونَهَا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Those who hoard and who accumulate gold and silver, and they do not give and do not spend in the path of Almighty Allah. Allah warns them of the punishment, which is in the next verse. Ulama have written that punishment is for those who do not give zakat of their wealth. Because there's a hadith, Allah Ta'ala has made zakat obligatory, which comes in Abu Dawood, لِيُطَيِّبَ مَا بَقِيَ مِنْ أَمْوَالِكُمْ, to purify the remainder of your wealth. So if you don't give zakat, the remainder of your wealth become tainted. Can you imagine what a great warning? You earn halal rizq. You don't give zakat on it, the entire wealth becomes tainted. And there's a hadith in Tabarani, which I haven't made mention of in the slide, but man kasaba tayyiban khabbathahu man zakat. He who earns a halal rizq, the failure to give zakat on it taints the entire wealth. So two in the slide, and I will conclude this slide with two understanding of the word purification. Why is zakat a purification? How is it a purifier? It purifies us from excessive fondness and purifies us from the harmful effects of wealth, and it purifies the remainder of our wealth. لِيُطَيِّبَ مَا بَقِيَ مِنْ أَمْوَالِكُمْ. This is the reason with regard to purification, and we look at the benefits of zakat amongst many other benefits in the next slide. And in the next slide, I will just there are many benefits. I've just given two of the benefits of zakat. One is a means of protection of our wealth. Protect your wealth by payment of zakat, said our beloved Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam in a hadith in Abu Dawud Sharif. In one hadith, ma talafa mal fi bar wa bahr, that wealth does not get destroyed in the land and in the ocean illa bihabsi zakat, except through the means of people not giving zakat. So that is through the means of zakat, Allah Ta'ala protects our wealth. And then very important, today throughout the world there is the scry, and unfortunate the capitalistic society does not allow the capitalistic society allows for a greater disparity between the rich and the poor. And today I don't need to go into the percentage. Anyone who wants to can go and do a Google search and see what great disparity is between the haves and the have-nots. Now, in an ideal Islamic society, Allah Ta'ala says in Surah Al-Hashr, كَيْ لَا يَكُونَ دُولَةً بَيْنَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ مِنْكُمْ. Islam does not impose or forces that there must be a forceful imposition with regard to the distribution of wealth. However, Islam does say that wealth must not only circulate amongst the wealthy. كَيْ لَا يَكُونَ دُولَةً بَيْنَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ مِنْكُمْ. Wealth must not be only amongst the wealthy. There must not be such a wide gulf in the living standards between the haves and the have-nots, between the wealthy and those who are not wealthy, because that creates tension in the society and it creates social disharmony. And we are seeing effects of that in many parts of the world, including in our own country. And therefore it comes in a hadith in Tabarani, Allah has prescribed that amount of wealth as zakat, which should suffice for the poor. Al-qadru alladhi yasa'u fuqara'ahum. Allah has made that amount of zakat compulsory. If given and discharged, then there will not be people who will starve. If there are people who are starving within the community and within the ummah, it is because the people do not give zakat. So this is just two of the benefits amongst many other benefits. I've just chosen these two. And of course, anyone who does more reading will find many of the other benefits. And we will continue. As I saying, in this particular first phase of the program, we are speaking on the motivation. Why should we give zakat? The benefits. And this is an important part, because that motivates us to be able to find out who should give zakat, on how much must we give zakat. And that, inshallah, Mufti Sahib will then give us the details. This is now the motivation on the importance and to motivate us towards giving zakat. And we go to the next slide, which speaks about a very important point in terms of the recipients of zakat. And there's this particular reason why I have put the slide on. In the next slide, if we could get the next slide. The Quran determines specific categories of recipients of zakat. And you've got the reference of it in the Quran. إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا وَالْمُعَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُم وَفِي الرِّقَابِ وَالْغَارِمِينَ وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ. Zakat and charity is for the poor, the needy. There is a technical difference between fuqara and masakin, the poor and the needy. And they're not the time to go into it. And those who collect them, those who administer them, there's a difference of opinion amongst the ulama that who is that? Is it only those who are appointed by an Islamic state, or can an individual do that? It's something that is up for grabs in the terms of different opinions on the matter. Those whose hearts are to be reconciled, to free the captives, free the prisoners. And of course, there is great amount of emphasis with regard to it. I was reading the book of the travels of Ibn Jubair, and he said when he came to Syria, a great amount of the zakat of the people of Syria was to free the prisoners which were held across the line, which were held by the disbelievers at that time. So this is also وَمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُم وَفِي الرِّقَابِ وَالْغَارِمِينَ وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, the debtors, and for the cause of Allah Ta'ala, and for those who are travelers. Now, what is important is we find from that there are specific categories of the recipients of zakat. Zakat cannot be used to put up a masjid. Zakat cannot be used for administrative buildings. Right? And this is the important point. Allah had said, lil fuqara. For lam, in here, the word lam is litamlik, to make the poor the owners. There used to be once upon a time the tithe or the tithe system, where in England and France, the government of the day, they used to impose directly upon the earnings of people a certain percentage, which they used to say would go to the poor. But how it used to do, it used to go to the church, then the clergy, and then the poor. So little used to trickle down to the poor that it had to be abolished. And people came to hate that particular system, because it used to go first to the church, then to the clergy, and then to the poor. So little trickle down. We must be careful that we don't make the same mistake with regard to zakat. That if it is left to the people only to use in administration, people would put up massive administrative blocks, with zakat money, and very little will go down to the poor. That is why in the fiqh of Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi, whenever there's a difference of opinion on a matter with regard to whether zakat must be imposed or not, he has one principle that always choose in the matter of zakat that view anfa' lil fuqara, that view that is beneficial to the poor. And I think everyone in this particular regard needs to understand the importance of this, that zakat must go more to the poor than in any other matter. In fact, we should try to reach a situation of 100% of the zakat going to the poor. And for that to happen, one point I would just like to add on that is, people give great amount of zakat. Maybe they give 100,000 rand of zakat, and they give it to an organization, not realizing that organization requires a certain degree of administrative funds to give your zakat. Now, if you give only zakat and tell people, make it 100% to the poor, where must that organization get the necessary funds to be able to disperse your zakat? If you do not give extra money to the zakat, lillah money or something for the administrative purposes, it means that the lillah money, the money of the ummah, is being used to discharge your obligation. So I think people must be careful with regard to that, to see that together with the zakat, they also give a portion of administrative money for that zakat to be administered and to be given. So the reason why I put that is the importance to show that they are specific. Now, the last slide, and I think it's important for us just to look at that. And the reason why I've put this slide, and I've said the virtues of generosity, and in the first one that I've got, in fact, I would just first start off with the last point on the slide. Zakat is the lowest limit of expression of human sympathy with our finance. Many times people give zakat and they feel that we have done enough. We have given zakat. Zakat is a minimum. Below that you can't go. You can't. Inna fil mali haqqan siwa zakat. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had said, there are considerations and there are rights upon your wealth other than zakat. Inna fil mali haqqan, there is rights upon your wealth other than zakat. You can't go and say, I've given zakat, I have done my duty, I don't have to give anything more. Allah in the first verse of the fourth juz of the Holy Quran, in Surah Ali Imran, Allah Ta'ala says, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You cannot achieve righteousness and closeness to Allah until you give of that which you love. Al-Iman bila infaq nifaq. There's an Arabic saying, Al-Iman bila infaq nifaq. Iman without being charitable is a portion of hypocrisy. And Muhammad ibn Hayyan, one of our great scholars in the past, has said that throughout our times and our history, there was a special virtue for generosity. And there was a special respect given to people who were generous. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had said that a person who is generous, qareebun min Allah wa qareebun min nas. He is close to Allah and he is close to human being. And bakhil and a miser is far away from people. You find people don't like misers. They stay away from them. Right? And he is far away from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, we need to build a situation of being generous beyond zakat. Zakat is important, but we need to build an attitude of generosity which goes far beyond zakat. Al-yadul ulya khayrun min yadis sufla. The upper hand is better than the lower hand. The hand that gives is better than the hand that receives. Be amongst those who are givers. Because through that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you. And there are many benefits with regard to being generous. And here the generosity that is used with regard to what we find in the hadith is not necessarily only with regard to zakat. In fact, the whole temperament and the whole emphasis that we find in the hadith gives us an indication that it goes to generosity beyond zakat. So therefore it comes a means of protection from the fire of Jahannam. Ittaqin nar walau bi shaqqi tamratin. Protect yourself from the fire of Jahannam even by giving a piece of date as charity. Our earning become blessed. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had said in a hadith, every day 2 angels come down from heaven and one of them says, Allahumma aati munfiqan khalafa. Oh Allah, give the one who spends, give him more. Oh Allah, give him more. Allahumma aati mumsikan talafa. Oh Allah, the one who withholds and does not give charity, oh Allah, withhold from him. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, O son of Adam, spend so that Allah Ta'ala can spend upon you. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has said in a hadith, if I would have been given to take an oath, I would have taken 3 oaths. One of them, which is relevant to our topic, charity does not decrease your wealth. The more you give, the more Allah Ta'ala gives. Yamhaqullahu riba wa yurbi sadaqat, says Allah in Surah Baqarah. Allah destroys interest and sood and usury, and Allah Ta'ala increases charity. Allah increases it. So give more in charity that Allah Ta'ala can give you. And don't wait till the last moments of your life. And I'll come now to the conclusion. وَأَنْفِقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقْنَاكُمْ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ يَأْتِيَ أَحَدَكُمُ الْمَوْتِ. spend before the time of your death comes. فَيَقُولْ رَبِّ لَوْلَا أَخَّرْتَنِي إِلَىٰ أَجَلٍ قَرِيبٍ فَأَصَّدَّقَ وَأَكُن مِّنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. Oh Allah, delay my death that I can give charity and I can become amongst the pious. وَلَن يُؤَخِّرَ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِذَا جَاءَ أَجَلُهَا. Allah Ta'ala says, death will not be delayed for the sake of you giving charity. Give. Nabi Karim Sallallahu was asked, Ayyu sadaqati azam? Ya Rasulullah, which sadaqah is the best in reward? He said, Anta saddaqa wa anta sahihun shahihun takhsha al-faqr wa ta'muru al-ghina. Give when you also fear poverty. Give when you also have expectation, I want more wealth. Do not delay until the time of your death come. حتى إذا بلغت الحلقوم وقلت لفلان كذا لفلان كذا. And then you say, give this one so much, give this one so much. So brothers, together with the importance of brothers and sisters, together with the importance of zakat, be charitable, give in other causes, help people. And in this particular regard, I will conclude with this. Maybe there's one more thing. We give charity out of the love of Almighty Allah. We don't want any return. إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. We give and we feed. لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً. We don't want reward and we don't want thanks from people. We only want it for the sake of Almighty Allah. لَا تُبْتِلُوا صَدَقَاتِكُمْ. Don't spoil the rewards of your charity by taunting and inconveniencing and harming and giving him taunts over the charity that you have given. Better, قَوْلٌ مَعْرُوفٌ وَمَغْفِرَةٌ خَيْرٌ مِنْ صَدَقَةٍ يَتْبَعُهَا أَذًى. It's better not to give him than to give him and to taunt him. And the last thing I will conclude, Ibn Kathir Rahmatullahi alayhi says, the rewards of charity are much, but it is not as much that it wipes away the sin of taunting a person after giving him. May Allah give us a tawfiq. Just few words of motivation for us to be able to give zakat and to be able to give charity in abundance. May Allah Ta'ala accept and Allah Ta'ala motivate and Allah Ta'ala give us the tawfiq of giving more. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
These lives, these sacred lives that we serve, this water for life, quenching thirsts, these souls without clinging onto life, these lives that we seek to enrich, soils enriched, hearts enriched. These bright human beings working, living, not just surviving, dignified, loved. These delicate lives without parents that we protect and care for. These hungry minds that we feed and teach and nurture. These heartbeats and breaths that we care for and limbs that we repair. These brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, these families, these gentle souls that together we save.
To save a life, it is as if you have saved all mankind. Save.
Jazakallah khairan to Maulana Ibrahim Bam for that inspiration and motivation with regards to why zakat is important, why it is important for us to give our zakat. And we thank him and we make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him a long, healthy life, that he can be with us for many years, inspiring us and sharing his knowledge and his wisdom with this particular community. And I'm sure he's known far afield outside of the boundaries of South Africa as well. So we continue to make dua for that. And I think when we look at this, I can only make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts from us. When you think about those two angels that will come down, that Maulana has spoken about, let us be of those who spend in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let us be of those who give our zakat when it is due. Let us be of those who does not count but give generously so that we can gain maximum reward. One of the other things that Maulana also mentioned was that giving of charity does not diminish or decrease our wealth. We must bear that in mind. In fact, it will increase it, because there's so many people that will be making dua for us, and there'll be so many angels that will be making dua for us. So let us go ahead and practice upon that. I'm now again, honored and privileged to be introducing our following speaker. That is none other than Mufti Muhammad Hafaji, speaking to us with regards to calculating your zakat. Before I hand over to him, just a reminder: let your questions come in, post it onto the chat. I have a few questions already that the viewers have given through. So continue letting those questions come in so we can ask either Maulana or Mufti to answer those questions, inshallah. But now I hand over to Mufti Muhammad Hafaji, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammadin wa barik wa sallim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Honorable viewers and listeners, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. At the very outset, I'd like to extend a warm sense of gratitude to Islamic Relief for this partnership in hosting a webinar in relation to our zakah and our calculation and discharge of zakah. In my segment, I hope to cover just the core aspects of calculation of zakah, and to do this, what I'm going to do is just at the very outset make it very clear that we may not be able to exhaust every scenario or every question or address every question that comes our way, and in this regard, or as a result, the next slide basically presents our contact details for anyone to keep in touch with us, contact us, so that we can respond to your questions and do justice to them, obviously. By way of introduction, the first thing that I want to touch on is the conditions of zakah itself. The reason why we talk about the conditions of zakah is simply because there are particular requisites before the obligation to discharge zakah applies to an individual. The second aspect I want to touch on is the zakah equation itself. Many individuals have a misconception that the zakah equation is something complex and something difficult or beyond our comprehension. Hopefully, I will demystify this and present the zakah equation in a simplified format so that it is understood for one and all. Thereafter, I want to go into the aspect of understanding nisab. For scholars and individuals who interact with zakah on a regular basis, the terminology of nisab or the other terminology of zakah itself is fairly familiar to them. But for the ordinary folk, the concept of nisab itself tends to be perplexing and confusing at times, and as a result, I'll try to unpack that to the best of my ability, inshallah. Thereafter, we look at the all-important aspect of determining an assessment date. Many individuals have difficulty in determining the date on which their zakah is due. As Sheikh Ibrahim Bam outlined, that zakah is not necessarily due in Ramadan, while many of us utilize and seize the opportunity to discharge the obligation in Ramadan, it may possibly be due in any other month, and determining that assessment date is important. Thereafter, I would look at the zakah assets itself in a simplified way, inshallah, followed by the non-zakatable assets, and then obviously some of the current liabilities that need to be deducted from the zakatable assets before applying the ratio of 2.5% on our zakatable assets. Then I'll briefly touch on the aspect of the recipients of zakah, so that there's some clear understanding and benchmarks in terms of identifying worthy recipients. If time allows us, we'll go through a case study of a particular scenario that could manifest itself, and I'll demonstrate how we sift out the assets from the liabilities and then apply the zakah ratio of 2.5%. So thereafter, we'll go into a general segment and entertain some of those questions, inshallah. Beginning with the conditions of zakah, there are on two levels. We have conditions. We have conditions relating to the payer of zakah, and we have conditions relating to the wealth upon which zakah is paid. Now, the first condition in relation to the payer of zakah is that the individual has to be a Muslim. In order to accrue reward in the eyes of the Almighty, one has to be a Muslim, carrying out any act of worship in order to accrue reward and merit in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second condition, and this is particularly applicable to the Hanafi madhab, is that the individual needs to be an adolescent or older. In other words, must have reached the age of puberty or older. Anyone younger than that does not have to discharge zakah in as far as the Hanafi madhab is concerned. As far as the Shafi'i madhab is concerned, wealth is due on the wealth of a minor. However, it is the duty of the guardian or the parent to discharge that zakah from the wealth of the minor on behalf of the minor. So I'm just confining myself in terms of the slides and the presentation itself to the Hanafi madhab. Time and time again, wherever I do or wherever necessary, I would bring to light the Shafi'i position as well. The third condition, in as far as the payer is concerned, is that the individual has to enjoy mental capacity. If the individual does not enjoy mental capacity, then they are absolved from the obligation to discharge zakah. In as far as the conditions for the wealth is concerned, wealth has to meet three conditions. First of all, the wealth itself has to equal or surpass the nisab rate, which I'll come to in a short while. Then the wealth upon which zakah is paid has to be simultaneously, and I'll emphasize on simultaneously. It must be simultaneously in one's ownership and possession. It does not suffice to only have one of these two conditions in order to subject an asset to zakah. It must be in ownership and possession. While I'm on the point, maybe I'll just digress a little bit in terms of what I'm trying to imply when I say that one needs to have ownership and possession. Let's take the example of an occupational pension fund, where an individual is subscribed to a pension fund by virtue of their employment scheme. This is a classic scenario where the individual may own the asset itself, but there is no possession in the sense that the individual has freedom of access to that fund. Cannot just simply withdraw it from an account of some sort. There has to be a process and some protocol followed in order to access some of those funds. So here's a classic scenario where an occupational fund meets the criteria of ownership, but it does not necessarily meet the criteria of possession, and hence is not subject to zakah. We'll address it in a later slide, inshallah. The third condition of wealth is that the wealth must pass the lunar year. It must be in possession of, or rather, the lunar year is utilized to calculate zakah on one's assets. I'll unpack to the best of my ability what we mean when we say the lunar year must pass. From my experience and my encounters with individuals assessing their zakah, doing zakah impact assessments, I find that many individuals misunderstand the application of the lunar year. Given that we are in the context of a Gregorian calendar and the financial system primarily operates using the Gregorian calendar, the International Standard Setting Authority for Islamic Financial Institutions has stipulated and agreed that if an individual is utilizing the Gregorian calendar, then the rate of 2.577% would need to be applied on one's zakatable assets. The reason being that the lunar year is roughly 10 to 11 days shorter than the Gregorian calendar. And as a result, if an individual has to, for no valid reason, adhere to the Gregorian calendar over a period of roughly 33 years, that individual is effectively paying 1 year less of zakah. And this is why the lunar year is important. However, if the lunar year is not utilized and the Gregorian calendar is utilized, then the rate of 2.577% would need to be applied to one's calculation of zakah. Now I would like to proceed to the zakah equation itself and simplify it to the best of my ability. By no means the zakah equation replicates these images that you see on the slide. These are sums that some of us may encounter difficulty resolving and finding a solution to. But the zakah equation is something straightforward and simple. In the first bullet, what I outline is the zakah equation itself. It's basically we're taking our zakatable assets, we're deducting particular liabilities. And I say deductible liabilities because it's not all our liabilities or not our liabilities in entirety that has to be deducted. It's a particular quantity of liability that needs to be deducted. And after making this deduction, we arrive at the net zakatable assets. Now, the total amount which needs to be subjected to zakah. This amount is then multiplied by 2.5%. So it's as simple as this. This is the zakah equation. Zakatable assets on one hand, we're deducting particular liabilities or particular quantity of liabilities. We're arriving at zakatable assets, net zakatable assets, and we're multiplying that by 2.5%. When doing this multiplication, basically when enacting the zakah equation, the net zakatable assets, if they are more or equal to the nisab rate, this is when zakah is payable. Whereas if the net zakatable assets, as you see in the first bullet, when the net zakatable assets are less than the nisab rate, then zakah is not payable, simply because the individual is not regarded as an individual who is wealthy in the eyes of the Sharia, and as a result of that does not have to pay zakah. So in simple terms, it's zakatable assets on the one hand, deducting particular liabilities or quantity of liabilities, we're arriving at our net zakatable assets, and we're multiplying that net zakatable asset amount or proportion of wealth to 2.5%. If that amount is exceeding the nisab rate, the net zakatable assets are exceeding the nisab rate, zakah is payable. If the net zakatable assets are not exceeding the nisab rate, then zakah is not payable. This is as simple as the zakah equation is. It's nothing difficult. What I would like to proceed to now is unpacking the nisab itself. And I've dedicated a few slides to this. The first point I want to make on the nisab itself is that the nisab, if we try to comprehend it, it is a threshold to determine a wealth position in the eyes of the Sharia. The Sharia has a particular built-in mechanism called the nisab, which is used to determine the wealth position, whether an individual is wealthy or not wealthy and rather impoverished. And this criteria is necessary so that to maintain fairness throughout the calculation of zakah. If you think about it, if zakah were to be imposed on an individual who does not surpass this threshold, effectively zakah is becoming a tax. It is becoming a burden on an individual who has to part with wealth which they require for their ordinary day-to-day needs. So this is essentially what nisab is. This is the hadith that you see now cited, where Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam is reported to have said that if you have 200 dirhams, which is a dirham is a silver coin in the time of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and that quantity of silver has been saved for a year, then you are obliged to pay 5 dirhams of zakah from it, basically 2.5%. And there is no obligation of zakah on gold until you have 20 dinars. If you have 20 dinars and it has been saved for a year, then half a dinar must be paid. This narration is recorded in Sunan Abi Dawood, and this narration is authentic. It is the primary source for the affirmation of nisab and the nisab threshold itself, given that nisab or the metallic values that were in the currency in vogue during the time of the Prophet ﷺ was gold and silver simultaneously. It was either dirhams or dinars, which are traded. Both enjoyed equal flexibility in the market. And as a result, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that 200 dirhams, the nisab of that is 5 dirhams. And if it is 20 dinars, then the nisab would be half a dinar. Proceeding to the next slide, what we look at is continuation of the nisab rate in terms of the prophetic era. So in the first bullet, basically what we are saying is that the nisab was based on gold and silver and not any other metal. This is simply because this was the monetary system during the prophetic era, and that monetary system was based on the bimetallic standard, which is obviously abolished in modern times. In the second bullet, what we talk about is the rationale of nisab is that it reflected and distinguished between wealthy and the needy for zakah purposes. If the Sharia had not made any distinction of this sort, it would have meant that zakah is a burden and it's a tax on an individual, even though they cannot afford, even though they are impoverished, they would have to be paying zakah. This is indeed would signify the Sharia being unjust, and hence the Sharia has a built-in mechanism for the nisab threshold. Proceeding further, in terms of the prophetic era, the difference in value between the two nisabs was a ratio of 1:10. The nisab of gold was 20 dinars, and the nisab of silver was 200 dirhams. What this boils down to is a ratio of 1:10. In essence, or in other words, 1 dinar would be equal in buying power to 10 dirhams in the market. And this is what the second bullet affirms, that the buying power of 1 dinar was equivalent to 10 dirhams. Now, if you look at it against this backdrop, in the third bullet, the point I make is that if you think about it, while it may seem perplexing and confusing to have 2 nisabs, we don't have to have 2 nisabs. This is actually 1 nisab. The nisab is only 1, simply by virtue of the ratio between gold and silver being 1:10. If essentially gold and silver, 1 dinar of gold had the same buying power of 10 dirhams of silver. And this is why it boils down to having essentially 1 nisab. It's not 2 nisabs, and it should not be confusing. Proceeding a little further, in terms of the weights now, in the modern era, obviously, scholars have had to derive the values of 200 dirhams, silver coins, or 20 dinars, 20 gold coins. And hence, they've arrived at the nisab weights itself. So in gold, the nisab weight calculates to an amount of 87.48 grams of gold. And in silver, that 200 dirhams equates 612.36 grams of silver. Now, if I just pause for a moment before we proceed to the next bullets here, if we think about it, if an individual only possesses gold as a zakat asset class, no other asset, in that case, the individual would need to possess more than 87.48 grams of gold to be paying zakah. Similarly, if an individual only owns silver as a zakatable asset and no other zakatable asset, no cash, no investments, no stock in trade, no gold, nothing, only silver, in that case, they would need to possess in excess of 612.36 grams of silver. However, the third scenario is where the individual, and this is the most common scenario, where an individual possesses portions of wealth, a little bit of gold, a little bit of silver, a little bit of cash, a little bit of stock in trade. In that case, now we need to equate the value. We need to cluster the value, and it needs to surpass a particular threshold of nisab. And this is what brings me to the next bullet, where we calculate the rand equivalents. These rates are calculated as at the 29th of March, yesterday, 2021. So in gold terms, if we calculate the nisab, the next bullet basically stipulates that the nisab calculates to 73,524 rand and 32 cents. And in silver terms, the next bullet highlights that the nisab rate is 8,055 rand and 3 cents. So basically, these are the nisab rates in terms of the modern day equivalent when an individual is clustering their wealth, and whereas they possess portions of zakat, different zakat asset classes, those are being clustered, and they need to equate these particular thresholds. Now, in the next slide, I want to highlight which of these two thresholds do we need to surpass? Is it gold or is it the nisab of silver? So many scholars have or are of the view that the silver nisab should be used as the threshold to determine who should discharge the obligation of zakah. Obviously, their view is based on the rationale that by using silver as the nisab rate, more individuals would qualify to pay zakah, and in the process, more of the poor would benefit as recipients of zakah. So this is simply by virtue of nisab of silver being the lower of the two thresholds, as we just saw in the previous slide, which was 8,055 rand. Other scholars hold that the nisab of gold should be used, which is obviously sitting at roughly about 73,000 rand. They believe that gold should be used to determine who should be discharging the obligation of the zakah. Their view is based on the rationale that the nisab of silver does not accurately differentiate between the wealthy and needy. These days, if an individual possesses an excess of 8,000 rand, what can that individual do with 8,000 rand in the eyes of these scholars? And this is why they view that gold would be the more appropriate nisab rate to apply, whether it be in gold quantity or the rand value of 20 dinars of gold. In the third and final bullet of this slide, what I basically state is that the former view of utilizing silver as the nisab is currently held by the global majority, while the latter view, and I acknowledge this, is gaining traction as more research emerges on the topic. This brings me to the end of the nisab itself in terms of determining the nisab of gold or silver. Now, I want to move on to determining a zakah assessment date. Before we proceed with the next slide, I just want to state the rule in a simple way so that it is easy to comprehend. Basically, the nisab assessment date and the application of the lunar year now is what we're talking about. In essence, what the rule is, what it entails is that an individual has to look at the beginning of their zakah year and the end of their zakah year. If at both points, the beginning of their zakah year and the end of their zakah year, that individual is in possession of wealth, zakatable wealth, which is exceeding the nisab rate, then they would need to take into account the total quantity of wealth in their possession at the end of the year. Even though during the year there is a fluctuation in their wealth, it may exceed the nisab, it may go below the nisab. But by virtue of having surplus zakatable wealth in the beginning of the zakah year as well as the end, they would need to be paying zakah on the total, even though some stores of wealth, some forms of wealth may only be in their possession for a short period of time. So in this first graph, I'll basically demonstrate 5 graphs to illustrate the point I'm trying to make. In this graph, the green bars represent the assets of an individual throughout a particular year. And I'm looking at an Islamic year. If you look at the x-axis, we're looking at the time frame, and our y-axis is basically looking at the value of wealth. So the green bars represent our assets, and the red bar represents the fluctuation of nisab throughout the year. In this particular scenario, what we see is an individual starting their zakah year on the 1st of Shaban 1441, and their zakah year is ending on the 1st of Shaban 1442. Now, if you think about it, what's basically happening here is that they are in possession of surplus wealth in the beginning and the end, and hence the total amount of wealth has to be subjected to zakah. Even though some forms of wealth, if you look at the second last bar here, this wealth was not in their possession for the full year, but it would still need to be subjected to zakah simply because in the beginning of the zakah year and the end, they were in possession of surplus zakatable wealth. This is the first slide. In the second slide, what I demonstrate here is a scenario where an individual possesses zakatable wealth exceeding the nisab rate in the beginning of the zakah year, as well as at the end of the zakah year. In this particular scenario, the individual's wealth went below the nisab threshold during the year. But it does not mean that the individual, their zakah lunar year has changed. The lunar year still remains simply because on the 1st of Shaban 1441, they had surplus zakatable wealth, and at the end of their zakah year, they still possess surplus zakatable wealth. So in this case, zakah would still be due on the wealth, on the total quantity of wealth in their possession. In the third slide, what we highlight is a scenario where an individual had their zakah year commencing on the 1st of Shaban 1441. In the starting of the year, they did not possess wealth which is exceeding the nisab rate. In the end of the zakah year, they are ending in a zakah with a positive balance where the zakah wealth, net zakatable assets, is exceeding the nisab rate. But in this case, zakah, the year would be different in the sense that in the start of the year, they did not possess surplus zakatable wealth. Surplus zakatable wealth only came into the possession of the individual on the 1st of Safar 1442. As a result, the zakah year of this particular individual is, so to say, broken and would only commence on the 1st of Safar 1442 and would end 1 year later on the 1st of Safar 1443. So here's a scenario where the rule is broken, the lunar year of an individual is broken, and it only commences on the 1st of Safar 1442, according to the dates provided on the graph itself. In the next graph, what we highlight, or bar chart, is we highlight a situation where an individual had zakatable wealth, but throughout the zakah year, the individual does not surpass the nisab rate. This is the simplest case where the individual would not have to be paying zakah since they have not been in possession of surplus zakatable wealth in the beginning of their zakah year as well as the end of their zakah year. Hence, no zakah is payable in this scenario. In the fifth bar graph, what we highlight is a situation where, and this is also touched on by our classical scholars, is that an individual had their zakah year on the 1st of Shaban 1441. It ended on the 1st of Shaban 1441. Both points, beginning and end of the year, the individual is in a surplus position. Ideally, this person should be paying zakah, but it so happened that on the 1st of Safar 1442, there's a zero balance in their wealth. They lost all their wealth, and there's just no zakatable wealth to be paying zakah. In this particular scenario, although it's rare, in this scenario, the 1st of Rabiul Thani 1442, bar number 4 is where the zakah year would commence, and 1 year later this individual would subject their wealth to zakah. So I hope that in these 5 graphs there's some level of understanding created in terms of using the lunar year, number 1, as well as the rule of assets being in one's possession for 1 lunar year. It does not necessarily mean, I just want to summarize by saying that it does not necessarily mean that the zakah wealth or zakatable asset has to physically be in one's possession for 12 months of the year. Indeed, this is very difficult. Hardly anyone can count every 200 rand note or 20 rand note or 100 rand note which day it came into their possession and which day it was not there. It's impossible. And this is why the Sharia states we look at the beginning of the zakatable year as well as the end of the zakah year. If at both points the individual is in possession of surplus zakatable wealth, zakah would be payable on the total itself. I now want to move on to the zakatable assets very quickly. Zakatable assets, in this first slide, I'm just going to list all the assets and then hopefully go through them as quickly as possible. Time is running out. First, we have cash, any cash, whether that, I'll go into the details of cash later on. The second bullet we have is your receivables, loans granted to anyone or trade receivables. Then we have gold and silver, which is a zakatable asset. Then we have stock in trade as a zakatable asset. Then we have investments in zakatable assets. Sometimes individuals carry out or enter into investment ventures and they do attract zakah. So we'll look at that. The last two are agricultural produce and livestock. I've placed asterisks on these two simply because I will not be going into the details of these two, purely because they apply to a very small number of individuals. And if they do apply to anyone, I would implore them to contact me and we can try to resolve the particular zakah aspect. Now, breaking down these zakatable assets. The first one is cash. In our next slide, we take a look at cash. Zakah is payable, in the first bullet I state that zakah is payable on all cash assets in one's ownership. Thereafter, I unpack the particular cash items that could potentially manifest. Zakah saving, you got cash savings for a house purchase, but no offer to purchase, nothing. It's just pure cash saving. That cash saving would be subject to zakah. saved rental income. You've received some rental income, you spent some of it on upgrading the property, and a portion is saved. That saved portion would need to be zakatable. The saved portion of investment dividends. Your investment may have paid out some dividends, you've spent some of it is still in your possession. That would need to be subjected to zakah. And then the last bullet here is the capital portion of a conventional fixed deposit. What I'm talking about here is an individual who placed funds in a conventional fixed deposit, which is obviously impermissible. In this case, only the capital contribution towards that fixed deposit would need to be subjected to zakah, not the entire portion, simply because the balance is then impermissible income. Zakah is due on petty cash at home, as well as savings in any bank account, whether it be a local bank account or a foreign bank account. That zakah is due on any cash reserve. Then zakah is due on all currencies in one's possession. I'm just enumerating these items so that we don't forget them and overlook them. But zakah is payable on currencies in one's possession. And obviously the prevailing rate of those currencies as at the assessment date of zakah would be necessary to consider for zakah on currencies. In terms of rewards programs, this is an emerging area for research. Our current position is that the verdict of zakah differs between rewards programs, and thus I would not be going into the details of particular rewards programs and their zakah implications. If it does apply to anyone, I would implore you to contact me, and we can try to address that to the best of our ability. In the next slide, we highlight receivables as a zakatable asset. So when we're talking about receivables, we're talking about loans. Zakah is payable on loans in each year. The lender, the individual who advanced the loan or gave the loan, has the option to either pay zakah annually, even though the amount is outstanding, or the individual can wait for settlement and then pay for the previous years in which that loan was unpaid. It just means that there's a burden of zakah now being carried, and it can be avoided by paying it annually. Credit sales in an ordinary business context, zakah is payable each year on the outstanding payments from trade stock. So if you've sold an item and payment is due, as long as it's not written off as bad debt, that credit sale would attract zakah, simply because it's a cash equivalent, so to say, in the accounting parlance. Then moving on to gold, in the next slide, I break down gold. Basically, the first question is, with any item, is it gold or not gold? Because we can have an item that's gold plated, but it's not gold, and it's exempt from zakah. So is it gold, first of all? The carats of note here are 14, 18, 21, 22, and 24. I've purposely not mentioned 9 carat here, simply because there is some debate regarding 9 carat gold being subject to zakah. Our current view is that 9 carat gold is exempt from zakah due to being less than 50% of the item constituting gold. In the eyes of the Sharia, if less than 50% of the item is gold, then the majority rule applies. The majority is alloy metal, and hence it is regarded as 100% alloy and not subject to zakah. 14 and above, a majority, more than 50% of the item itself is gold, and hence needs to be subjected to zakah. So that's the first question, is it gold? The second question, and the next bullet, is what's the carat value? One needs to determine the carat value. That carat value is important because the carat value differs from day to day, and it is calculated on a regular basis. The third question is, how many grams does one have of that particular carat? This is also important because we need to multiply and do a sum in terms of calculating the zakah on gold itself. I'm not too sure if participants are able to view the slides itself. If participants can view the slides, then it would make it easier to follow the discussion. Are participants able to see the slides? So we're on gold now. What I've done here is just done an example. So assuming the current rate is 584 Rand and 52 cents for 22 carat. That's the gram, that's the value per gram we have of 22 carat. And that rate is obtainable from our office on a day-to-day basis. We're multiplying it by 30 grams because that's the amount of gold the individual has. And the result is 17,535 Rand and 60 cents. This is the approximate value of the item now. It may not be an accurate value. It may not be the value that one gets when going to trade in the gold jewelry, but it's an approximated value excluding VAT when we calculate these rates. In step 2, we're basically taking this amount of 17,000 Rand, multiplying it by 2.5%, and this is the result. 438 Rand and 39 cents is what needs to be based as zakah on this particular item itself. I hope that this example highlights the method that needs to be adopted to calculate zakah on gold itself. In terms of gold coins, our current view is that zakah is due based on the gold content, whether it be Kruger Rands or the Mandela coins. Zakah is due based on the gold content. This is much easier in terms of handling gold coins, Kruger coins. But when it comes to Mandela coins, there tends to be a difference in the value of the gold content versus the face value of the coin. For this purpose, in the eyes of the Sharia, the gold content is what needs to be utilized to calculate zakah. Then I move on to stock in trade as a zakatable asset. I'll just list the items for anyone who is in business and requires the list of assets that need to be included. First is bank deposits and petty cash. Then we have trade receivables as the second bullet. Any items sold on credit. The third item is loan receivables. If the business has granted any loan and it's not written off. Packaging material is also subject to zakah, and raw material is also subject to zakah simply because these are inputs for the final product. In terms of raw material, I'll just elaborate a little bit in the sense that if the raw material is visible in the finished product, then there is unanimity that the raw material is subject to zakah. If the raw material is not visible in the finished product, then the raw material is not subject to zakah. Obviously, stock in trade intended for resale is subject to zakah. So this is basically, in a nutshell, in the business context, the assets that need to be included for zakah. In terms of calculating zakah on stock in trade, stock should be valued at the retail price, excluding VAT, obviously, and not at the cost price. I haven't come across any differing view on this. There seems to be widespread unanimity globally, in fact, not only in South Africa, that the retail price should be utilized when calculating zakah on stock in trade. In the second bullet, what I state is that if goods do not have a retail price, it's relatively, there isn't a certain market value, then any other proxy can be used to determine the current value of the item before subjecting it to zakah. So if in a wholesale business, if the wholesale price is the only value that can be realized, then that's the value that needs to be attached to the assets. Zakah can be paid in cash or in kind. However, one needs to keep in mind the best interest of the poor. If discharging zakah in kind is not going to be in the best interest of the poor, then it is best to discharge zakah in cash. You think about the scenario where maybe shoes are being given to the poor, whereas the poor require food to eat. So one needs to be cognizant of that. Goods in progress, these are valued based on the stage of progress. If the goods are finished up to 70%, then 70% of the market value of that particular merchandise would need to be included as a line item in the zakah calculation. In the next bullet, we state that lay-by goods, this depends on the characterization of the transaction. If we're regarding it as a future transaction to be taking place in the future, whenever the final installment is paid, in this context, then the zakatable, the merchandise itself is still subject to zakah in the hands of the trader or the retailer, the vendor, simply because the transaction is yet to take place in the future. So the goods would be zakatable. The sum of cash that has been lodged with the retailer would have to be deducted from the zakatable assets simply because it's due or refundable to the client or the customer. Consignment goods as well depends on characterization. If we're regarding it as a done transaction and a spot transaction, then the goods would need to be subjected to zakah as ordinary goods or stock in trade. In the next bullet, I highlight that free on-board goods are subject to zakah in the hands of the vendor itself. Although the goods may be on the water, may have left the port itself, the goods would be zakatable simply on the basis of the legal transfer of title between the seller and the purchaser of those goods. So those free on-board goods would need to be subjected to zakah. In the final bullet on this slide, I state that dead stock also needs to be subjected to zakah. Defective stock also needs to be subjected to zakah. Obviously, we'll be using the market value of these two items to subject it to zakah. In the next slide, I want to touch on the stock in trade, which is non-zakatable. I'll just quickly go through this list. Intangibles not developed or sourced for trade, such as copyrights, patents, trademarks, and software, these are not zakatable. In the second bullet, I highlight that property, plant and equipment is not subject to zakah itself. The aspect of capital or fixed goods, so to say, need not be subjected to zakah. Fixtures and fittings need not be subjected to zakah. Similarly, collateral lodged with another vendor, another trader, does not need to be subjected to zakah simply because the collateral itself may be in one's ownership, but it's not in one's possession. The individual who lodged the collateral does not have control or unfettered access to that collateral lodged, and this is why it would not be subjected to zakah. Moving on, we have investments, listed equity. These are the misconception we have here is that many individuals apply the accounting or understanding that an investment is only subject to zakah on the growth per annum. That is not the case. From a Sharia perspective, zakah is based on a balance sheet concept more than an income statement concept, and this is why zakah is payable on the total market value of the investment. If the listed equity is non-Sharia approved, then obviously zakah is only payable on the capital investment, not on the impermissible component. It's only the capital lodged, simply because any gains made on this type of investment would need to be discarded. In the next slide, I touch on listed equity again, and I go into the detail of the different strategies with which these investments are held. What I'll do maybe is go through this very quickly, just read through the slides. If they are relevant, I'll come back to it in the question and answers. In terms of listed equity, if there's a buy and hold strategy, then zakah is not due on the full market value of the listed equity investment. Zakah is only due on the underlying zakatable assets. However, if there's an active trading strategy, then zakah is due on the full value of the investment, the market value of the investment. Active trading here means an investment with the sole intention to sell and capture short-term positive price fluctuations. In the next slide, what I do is break down how shares should be assessed. I'll ask for this example to just be on display for a while, and then come back to it if it's necessary to determine zakah on shares itself or listed equity. So this is basically the shell. We'll come back to this slide if it does feature in the question and answer session. In the next slide, I touch on investments, property. If the property is residential, personal usage, no zakah is due. If it is bought to sell, obviously now it's stock in trade, so zakah is based on the selling price. But that's purely if the individual buys 5 or 10 homes to sell them primarily with the intention of resale, then we have zakah falling or being due. If the property is purchased to let, then zakah is only payable on the saved portion of the rental income and not on the gross rental income for the year. This is as far as investments and property is concerned. In terms of investments, in the next slide, what I highlight is the retirement scenario, whether it is a pension fund, provident fund, or retirement annuity. I've summarized this to the best of my ability. In the first bullet, I state that if the fund is, or subscription to any of these funds is occupational, what I mean is in the employment context, then there is no zakah. No zakah is applicable until the individual has some level of access to the funds itself. In the second bullet, or the next one, I state that if these are voluntarily entered into and they are Sharia compliant, then they need to be subjected to zakah in terms of the net realizable value. If they are non-Sharia compliant and voluntarily entered into, then the zakah is only payable on the capital contributions towards the fund, since it is a voluntary subscription. Obviously, in any of these contexts, whether it's occupational or voluntary, once the pension, provident, or retirement annuity is redeemed or is voluntarily transferred to another employer, then it would attract zakah 1 year later. If there's a cash amount that is withdrawn, that cash amount would be zakatable. Or if no cash is withdrawn, then the net realizable value of the pension, provident, or retirement annuity would need to be subjected to zakah. The next two slides basically highlight investments in the context of cryptocurrencies. Again, I'm just going to bring these up for display because the discussion is somewhat complex and intricate. If it is relevant to anyone, we would come back to it. But these are the basic principles in terms of zakah on crypto investments. While this slide is on display, it just sees the opportunity to summarize by saying that crypto assets are digital assets. And in our current view, zakah needs to be paid on the crypto assets. In short, it depends on what's the underlying asset of the crypto. If the crypto asset is, the underlying asset is gold or any other ordinary zakatable asset, then obviously we're looking at zakah on that crypto asset. If the underlying asset is not gold or is not a zakatable asset, then it would depend on the strategy adopted by an individual who holds crypto, whether it's a buy and hold strategy of crypto or it's an active trading strategy. These would differ in terms of the zakah outcome. And I'll come back to this slide and as well as the next one if it applies to anyone. I'm just going a bit faster through it in the interest of time, and we can always come back to it. Simply because these are relevant and gaining more traction as we go along. In terms of non-zakatable assets, precious items that are not intended for resale is the first one. No matter how precious the item may be, if it's not for resale, it would not be zakatable. Whether it be a painting or any other valuable item, it can be how precious, as I said. It can have market value, but if it's not for resale, it's not zakatable. The Sharia does not regard it as a zakatable asset. Money collections. When I talk about money collection, I'm referring to money which is out of circulation and does not have buying power. Stamp collections, similarly, may have immense value, but are not subjected to zakah. A dwelling, motor vehicle, furniture, these are not zakatable assets. And the value does not need to be considered. In the eyes of the Sharia, these are discounted from a zakah perspective. Fixtures and fittings in the business context is obviously not zakatable. In the next bullet, we highlight the aspect of impermissible wealth. If an individual does possess large reserves of interest money, for example, it would not need to be subjected to zakah. Then if the jewelry is non-gold or not silver, it's just plated, it would not need to be subjected to zakah. This is very much the zakah liabilities, non-zakatable assets, sorry. In terms of current liabilities, the first one we're looking at accounts in arrears. From an Islamic perspective, if an account is in arrears, that full amount is payable, it's due, and hence would need to be deducted from zakatable assets. Personal or casual loans between family members also need to be deducted as a zakatable liability. In this case, if an individual is paying a particular amount on a regular basis, that amount multiplied by 12 would be permissible for deduction. Any debt which is payable in full within the next 12 months can be deducted from one's zakatable assets. And then 12 months of installments in terms of long-term liabilities. When we talk about long-term liabilities, we're referring to repayments on a home or repayments on a motor vehicle. If the full outstanding debt has to be taken into account, a person may possibly or potentially pass a few years without subjecting their wealth to zakah. And this is why the scholars have unanimously agreed that 12 months of installments need to be deducted from zakatable assets. Short-term expenses for the current month in which zakah is being calculated, maybe a telephone bill, school fees, madrasa fees, university fees, depending on how the structure of the fees are. If the full semester has to be paid, the full semester, the current semester in which zakah is due can be deducted as a current liability for zakah purposes. Then in terms of recipients, we are nearing the end, inshallah. In terms of recipients, in the first bullet, what we state that is in terms of the Hanafi madhab, the eligibility formula for any recipient of zakah is as follows. I've just given this as a basic benchmark for anyone to apply in their individual context before giving anyone zakah. If we have identified someone who could potentially qualify as a recipient of zakah, we need to look at the cash position of the individual, whether they possess gold, silver, zakatable assets or zakatable assets in the form of investments, stock in trade, as well as assets above basic necessity. So this is on the asset side. We're totaling all of these assets of the individual. Then we're deducting their current liabilities. If the amount, the net zakatable amount is less than the nisab rate, then the individual is eligible and qualifies as a recipient of zakah. This is a simple benchmark that most of us use, Sharia scholars use to determine whether an individual qualifies as a recipient or not. Then as far as zakah recipients, non-Muslims do not qualify, given that we have sufficient amount of Muslims who require zakah and can make good use of zakah. In terms of the Hanafi madhab, zakah cannot be discharged unto one's spouse. In terms of the Shafi'i madhab, there is some concession in terms of discharging zakat to one's spouse. Obviously, a wealthy individual does not qualify for zakah. Ascendants cannot be given zakah, one's parents, grandparents upwards. Descendants, children, grandchildren downwards cannot be given zakah in terms of the Hanafi madhab. Giving these individuals zakah is tantamount to keeping it to oneself. And this is why, or this is the basic rationale why the Hanafi madhab disallows giving zakah to an ascendant or descendant. This is a typical case study. In the first column, we look at the list of assets and liabilities. We have clothing, we have special clothing for an occasion. These are small values by any stretch of imagination and not accurate. But just to give an idea, we have a motor vehicle worth 120,000 Rand. We have gold coins, Mandela coins, Kruger coins. We've got gold jewelry, cash at bank, for sale merchandise, fixtures worth 30,000 Rand, merchandise sold on credit. So we have a debtor there now. Someone owes us money. On the right side column, we've got furniture. We've got personal residence worth 1 million Rand, a home loan paying 8,000 Rand monthly, vehicle repayments, we're paying 1,500 Rand monthly. We've got loan from father, casual loan. We've got a bad debt, which we've written off. It's an asset, but we've written it off. We've given up hope of receiving it. We've got a coin hobby of 10,000 Rand, and we're owing money to a merchandise supplier now of 10,000 Rand. In the next slide, what we do is sift out all the assets from the list. We have gold coins, which are subjected to zakah at 45,000 Rand. We have gold jewelry from the list, 20,000 Rand. Cash at bank worth 50,000 Rand. Merchandise for sale, stock in trade, 5,000 Rand, sorry. Debtors who we've not written off, these are cash equivalents now, so we include them for zakah purposes, 20,000. So our total zakatable assets is now 140,000 Rand. This is now a summary of our zakah. We've totaled up all our assets. We're looking at our liabilities now. On our home loan, it may be worth 1 million Rand. We're paying 8,000 Rand, but 96,000 Rand is only payable for the year. The deductible value is 96, not 1 million Rand. On vehicle repayments, similarly, the deductible portion is 18,000 Rand. Since we're taking into account our 1,500 Rand of monthly premium multiplied by 12, and our merchandise supplier, who is also a liability, we owe this individual within the next 12 months 10,000 Rand. So our total liabilities are 124,000 Rand. Now for the calculation itself, we're taking our total zakatable assets of 140,000 Rand. We're deducting particular liabilities, a particular quantity of liabilities, 124,000 Rand. Our net zakatable amount, our net zakatable assets are sitting at 16,000 Rand. This is what we multiply by 2.5%, and we arrive at an amount of zakah payable, a mere small meager amount of 400 Rand payable as zakah. This is very much our case study to contextualize the calculation of zakah. On a general note, and I'll end off on this, we endeavor to discharge zakah personally as far as possible. By and large, while organizations do exist to discharge the zakah on our behalf, we should try to do it personally. In this regard, we should consider relatives. Ascendants and descendants obviously do not qualify from a Hanafi fiqh point of view. There's no need to specify the status of money being given, and zakah can be prepaid before the year actually turns or is matured. Zakah may be discharged monthly on a regular basis. However, it is important and integral to have an intention together with giving that zakah in order for that zakah to be discharged correctly. Questions can be forwarded to this address, or our contact numbers are available for any queries in relation to zakah, inshallah. I hope that the presentation was of benefit to one and all, and that it hasn't been confusing to anyone, at least.
Piece that you've shared with us with regards to the calculation of zakah, and gives us lots of clarity. There are quite a few questions, so I would like to delve into that for the next few minutes, inshallah, and just ask the questions. I want to make mention that the country is vast, South Africa, and there's somebody that's signed that's online watching this zakat workshop, and it's all the way from the Eastern Cape in a place called Krab. So I just need to make mention of that. Alhamdulillah, and we welcome everybody, but a special mention to a small town like Krab. So inshallah, there's a couple of questions. The first question that came up is that, please explain zakat on excess property that is more than residential or a residential home. So there's a property, they're utilizing it for other means of income. So it's not just a residential home, but how do they calculate the zakat on that?
Okay. So from a Hanafi fiqh point of view, zakah is not, and as far as I recall, this is also a view held by the Shafi'i madhab, that zakah is not payable on the current market value of that property. If that property were to be sold, that value is not what is considered for zakah purposes. From a zakah point of view, zakah is only due on the rental income, the accrued, the saved rental income from those properties which are out on rental. So I'm assuming that the individual has maybe a property or more than one property that is generating rental income. It's only the saved portion of that rental income which needs to be subjected to zakah. So let's just take an example of maybe say 50,000 rand hypothetically received in a year, but 20,000 was utilized to upgrade the property. In that particular example that I cited, only 30,000 would be subjected to zakah.
Inshallah. Mufti, earlier you spoke about, you're paying zakat on people who owes you money. And you said you can pay the zakat at a later point when the loan is repaid. What if the loan is never repaid? Are you still liable for that?
Good question. Zakah on unpaid loans is basically applicable for as long as the individual creditor has hope of receiving that amount of money. So it's essentially not written off as bad debt. There's some level of hope that the individual will receive it. So in that particular scenario, the first case would be where there's a strong chance of the individual paying, and hence the creditor in that scenario pays zakah on the outstanding amount on an annual basis. The second scenario would be where the creditor doubts that this debtor may not pay me, may pay me. In this case, what could be done is zakah could be deferred to the point where the full loan is settled and paid. When it is settled, if and when it is settled, that is when the creditor backdates the zakah for the few years that the amount was outstanding. Obviously, if the amount is, in the third scenario, is written off as bad debt, from the moment of writing it off as bad debt, the zakah, the amount would not have to be subjected to zakah.
Jazakallah khairan for that. Two more questions here. It says, my husband is the only one working in the home. How is the zakat calculated on the household as I am taking care of my child? So I just want to know on the family basis, how is it calculated?
Okay, in this regard, zakah, each individual would need to be viewed on their own merit. So we're looking at the adult male on his own merit. If zakah is due on that particular individual, then he as a standalone unit, as a standalone individual, would be subjecting his wealth to zakah. Then we have the wife who is a standalone unit and assessed on her own merit. If she is or qualifies or meets the criteria to be subjecting her wealth to zakah, then the default position is that she would have to pay or settle her own zakah obligation. However, if the husband voluntarily puts himself forward for settlement of the zakah obligation of his wife, it is permissible, it is allowed. A husband can discharge zakah on behalf of his wife. In that particular scenario, I detected that there's also mention of a child. If the child has got wealth which is surpassing the nisab rate, then according to the Shafi'i madhab, zakah would be due on the wealth of the minor. The parents or the guardians would then have the obligation to ensure that the zakah is discharged. If the household is Hanafi, then they would not need to subject the wealth of the minor to zakah.
Mufti, an interesting question here. It says, if someone is always giving charity throughout the year, how do you know if he falls under the zakat, sadaqah, or lillah?
What I'm not too clear on is, are they referring to the individual who's giving throughout the year? Does he qualify as a recipient now?
No, I said, well, what I'm understanding, I'm going to try and rephrase the question. It says here that if somebody is giving charity or giving charity every throughout the year, how would they determine whether the charity that's being given is either zakat, sadaqah, or lillah?
Okay, good question. Okay, so basically, the classical books of fiqh across all four established schools of jurisprudence state that the differentiating factor between different forms of charity is the intention of the individual. If an individual discharges an amount of charity and intends it to be just pure lillah, it's just sadaqah, it's just nafil sadaqah, it's just for to avert some calamity, then that is what applies. And whenever zakah is calculated, the particular amount discharged as lillah cannot be deducted from the zakah due. Similarly, if an individual discharged amounts of money or particular forms of wealth during the year, and their express intention was zakah, then it would constitute zakah payment. On the annual assessment date, they would just assess the actual zakah due and determine what amount was already paid. If they've paid more than is necessary, then well and good. If they've underpaid, then they would just make up the difference and settle their zakah obligation accordingly. So it all depends on intention. In fact, the classical books go as far as stating that there are a few indicators of what constitutes zakah. Number one is separating the wealth from one's store of wealth. So you're separating a portion or a quantity of wealth from everything else. This, in the Hanafi madhab, is automatically classified as an intention to classify that portion which has been separated as zakah. Similarly, giving a portion of wealth with the intention of zakah, the intention also classifies it as zakah automatically. So those are just a few indicators of when a discharge constitutes zakah and when it constitutes any other form of charity.
Jazakallah khairan so much, Mufti. That was the last question. We really want to take this opportunity to thank you for spending so much time with us, for sharing the intricacies of calculating zakat, and you've given your contact details as well as the Jamiat Ulama's contact details in terms on the screen, where people can contact yourselves in terms of further information that is required. But we want to thank you, and we know it is going on to almost 10 p.m. And it's really been a pleasure to have you on board with us, and we look forward to having further engagement with yourself as well as Maulana Ibrahim Bam, who has early on spoken about the motivation of giving zakat and the importance thereof. So there's so much lessons that we can take this evening, and I walk away from here this evening quite inspired, quite more informed to be able to engage and understand my obligations with regards to zakat. And I'm sure many of those viewers this evening on the webinar will take the same lessons from this, as well as take heed of the advice that is given this evening. So we really want to thank you on behalf of Islamic Relief South Africa for partnering with us to bring about this zakat workshop. Jazakallah khairan.
I mean, Jazakallah khair. The pleasure is mine, and I do look forward to future interactions, inshallah.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Millions of people are living in peril. No shelter, no security, no food. Drought, famine and poverty afflict the lives of the most vulnerable people on the planet. Natural disasters and man-made conflicts have trapped millions into spiraling cycles of poverty, malnutrition and disease. This Ramadan, you can change this. Your zakat can feed the starving and help build homes. Your zakat can help educate children and provide medicines to the sick. Your zakat can change their world. Donate to Islamic Relief. Call 0800 111 898 or visit islamicrelief.org.za.